Дорогие друзья, dear brothers and sisters, we're about to begin the second and final lecture of our conference. As you all know, we prayed in a church which was founded by St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco in 1949. To be more specific, on September 11th, 1949. Of course, September 11th, you all know because of what happened many years ago when the terrorists destroyed the Twin Towers in New York, attacked the Pentagon, and another plane was grounded, was crashed in the hills of Pennsylvania by a number of heroic people. That's the day we remember, but the September 11th, according to the old calendar, which is August 29th, is the feast of the beheading of St. John the Baptist. It's a fast day. It's one of those feasts which is, on the one hand, joyous, on the other hand, it's a fast day because we all grieve that St. John gave up his life. And it's a very unusual feast for a parish. Usually, feasts like the beheading of John the Baptist usually relegated to monastic churches. But that was the first day that Vladika served liturgy in Washington, D.C., where he came to lobby on behalf of his flock that was stranded on a Filipino island of Tubabao. And after several months of labor, he was actually able to get his people to leave the island and move to the United States, Australia, South America. And of course, every single little detail of St. John's life is precious to us, all of us, not just to those who live in San Francisco where his relics are, and those of us who live in Washington. He is truly a universal saint, a saint of this country because this is where he reposed, and one of the people who knows him best because he has been studying and praying before the relics of St. John and has been writing about him and collecting archival material is Archpriest Father Perekrestov, who is the senior cleric at the Joy of All Sorrow Cathedral in San Francisco, which has the good fortune of having the relics there in the main cathedral. And Father is always very receptive whenever people ask to do a moleben. They write from all over the world asking for prayers before the relics of St. John, because St. John has a reputation of being quick to hear. Father Peter is a graduate of St. Holy Trinity Seminary in Jordanville, New York. He and his Matushka do a lot of research, a lot of scholarly work, Matushka in liturgical music, I believe, and Father, of course, is the biographer of St. John of Shanghai. So without further ado, we will call upon Father to present his lecture to us. I'm sure it will be most interesting. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Your Eminence.
Switch to sprint.
Your Eminence, dear fathers, dear brothers and sisters, dear friends, dear young people. It's a joy to be here. I haven't been to a St. Herman's conference for years, so it's a real privilege. Before we start, there's a word from our sponsor. Here we go. My sponsor is Red Bull because it helps people stay awake on my lectures. So if anybody has any issues, when I told my wife that my lecture is after liturgy, she says that's a tough challenge. So to keep you folks awake. Okay. It's actually my first PowerPoint presentation. whenever I travel on an airplane, I always travel in a cassock. I don't remember traveling without a cassock. And some of the most interesting meetings take place on the airplane or in the airport. People, sometimes Orthodox people will walk up, get your blessing. Somebody will talk to you. Sometimes you sit down and the cute girl next to you, she really presses to the left side if you're on her right. Because a lot of people are afraid that I'll begin preaching and they don't know who I am. People from California kind of like me because I'm an old hippie. And I'm also diverse. So there are, but traveling on the airplane, it's really nice to meet people, and I make it a point never to speak about Christianity or Orthodoxy, never, unless people ask a question. And what usually happens is that nice girl who's pushing away from me, I can offer her a cookie, or I can ask her if she likes the app she's using. And then she begins telling me about the app, and I tell her about another app, and then she begins trusting me a little bit. And then she says, I was wondering what order you are. And then we can gradually get into conversation. So one time on the airplane, I sat next to this girl from, judging from her appearance, looked like she was from Berkeley. And I said, you must be from Berkeley. And she says, how do you know? And I said, well, you all dress the same. It's the same Birkenstocks. It's like a uniform in Berkeley. You should kind of be more trendy and more open-minded. And she was staring at me. And so we kind of became friends. And then she asked me about Orthodox, and she says, that's exactly like Buddhism. And I couldn't really answer her because we had no common ground to start on. We had no scripture, no tradition, just her feelings and my bad explanations. And throughout the flight, she kept trying to prove this. And then the latter part of the flight, I was looking at something in my phone, and I said, oh, here's our church. And her eyes lit up. And I said, Wayne, we have a dead guy there. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, we have this glass case with a dead guy. We call them relics. And so, she took a look, and then I began telling her about St. John. And she was absolutely silent when I told her this man did not sleep from 1924 to 1966. He never slept in a bed. And I told her about the orphanages. And that was the best explanation of Orthodoxy. I realized that was what she needed to hear. She didn't need to hear the dogmatics. She didn't need to hear theology. She didn't need to be moralized. She just felt this person in Buddhism, nothing close exists to that, and this is in America. And she said, I'd like to drop by your church. So, the way of the saints and the way of a living faith is extremely powerful. This year is the 50th anniversary of St. John's repose, and after he died, he appeared in a dream to a lady, and he told her, although I have died, I am alive. St. John was canonized by the Russian Church abroad in 1994. There was a theologian, Archimandrite Cyprian Kern, and he used to say the following. He used to say that every local church gives world orthodoxy something of its own. The Greeks have given us theology. The Serbs, they may not go to church, but they are the defenders of the faith. They'll die for the faith, although they may not know anything. And the Russians have given piety. And to these words of Father Cyprian, I would like to add that Rokor's gift to world orthodoxy is St. John. That wonderful hymn before the feast of Nativity, and I think it's of Nativity too. What can we offer unto you, our Lord? And the wise men have given you gifts, and you have received the manger, and we can give you our hearts. And in a way, just St. John by himself, I would say, justifies the existence of Rokor and its appearance on the scene of world orthodoxy. He's probably the greatest saint of the 21st century. He was born in Here's a little, it's my first keynote, so there might be a little more effect than usual. He was born in 1986 in present-day Ukraine, and he lived near a monastery. It was called the Holy Caves Monastery. Here's the Holy Caves Monastery. And as a young boy, he would walk to the monastery through the woods instead of taking the road. And this monastery was very important in his formative years. He saw the monastics, they lived in caves, and there were some very holy cave dwellers. And this left a very big imprint on his heart. You know, I think I'm a priest because I went to Jordanville. You know, I grew up in a parish. And like everybody, you go, you sing, you hang out. But when I went to the monastery, I was just overwhelmed. You know, it's the first time I saw real monasticism, first time heard monastic singing. And I don't know, I came home, I stopped watching television, although nobody told me one word. I didn't go to confession. I stopped watching television, I stopped listening to certain types of music. My mother got really scared because I was only listening to the monastery services. And one monk told me one thing, Father Prokopy, the cook, he told me, "What's your name?" I said, "Peter." And he said, "Oh, come and visit us, come and stay with us this summer." And I did. I became a summer boy, like Father Victor was a summer boy, and probably maybe some other summer boys here. And I didn't really want to be a priest, but I did want, it's the only place I found which was very, very real. I mean, I found more joy and more realness in the monastery than anywhere in the outside world. And I did not want to be a monk either, or I wasn't sure. But this first visit to the monastery determined my future. And St. John, growing up near a monastery, I think it laid this very important foundation. And he would play with his toys, and other boys would play soldiers, and he would build little monasteries. And he had a nanny, a governess. She was French. And he began praying. As a little boy, he began praying very fervently and very long. And when she saw this, his French governess converted to Orthodoxy. So that was that was God's first conversion through St. John. His parents were Boris and Glafira. They were very noble people from Russian nobility. And they instilled in him a great piety. And he really honored his parents, and he emphasized that honoring parents is very fundamental. And sometimes we think about spiritual life as prayer, singing in the choir, going to St. Herman's, but if you do not honor your parents, all that will have really, won't have much value. I don't know if you've read the book, Our Thoughts Determine Our Lives by Elder Thaddeus. And I was amazed how many times he basically says that 90% of all the world's problems are because people do not honor their parents. That is the key and the root. And in the scripture, the only time we're promised a long life, the only time we're not promised a long life for reading 50 acathsts or even doing good deeds. We're promised a long life only in one case, when we honor our parents. And Elder Thaddeus writes, "The Lord showed us how to honor our parents by his own example, when, as his suffering on the cross was nearing an end, he entrusted his mother, the Theotokos, to his disciple John. See how the Lord took care of his mother in his last hour. What do we do with our parents? God forbid that we should continue to treat our parents the way we do. Even from our childhood, we do not honor our parents, but we want to live long and well. How can we live well if we have disobeyed this God-given law from our childhood? If your parents are atheists and you are a believer, do not reproach or taunt them with your faith, but pray for them and be good to them." It's very important, my friends, because our Lord doesn't say honor good parents. He says honor any parent you have, because we have no others. But he doesn't say respect your parents. He doesn't even say love your parents. That has to be earned. If your father beats your mother, you probably won't respect him and won't love him. Maybe you'll love him as a sick person. but you do still have to honor them, and you cannot raise your voice on your father or raise your arm. But you could stand between your mother and father, and you could take the hits for your mother's sake. St. John went to school, went to law school. He became a lawyer. And while he was in Kharkiv, when he was in Kharkiv, the bishop there was the famous Metropolitan Anthony Kropovitsky. He's the one who founded the Russian Church abroad, the first hierarch. And he was a man of, was very dynamic. He loved young people. His quarters were always open for discussions. He was a great preacher, and he his sermons were not typical or boring. And St. John heard these sermons, he saw him, and Metropolitan Anthony was called the Mountain of Love, Gora Lyubvi, and he's considered the Abba, the father of the Russian Church abroad. And when St. John met him, he wanted to serve God in full capacity, and he went under the wing of Metropolitan Anthony and became his spiritual son. One of St. John's ancestors was a saint, St. John of Tobolsk. Anybody know which two books St. John of Tobolsk wrote? Priests, bishops? Yeah, he wrote two books, and I think one at least is translated into English. One is The Royal Path of the Cross, and the second book is called Ytrapion, which is the sunflower. And out of all plants on earth, the sunflower is the one that turns towards the sun. So wherever the sun is, it will turn. And in the same way, we have to submit our will, and we should always turn it towards God. And for St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco, these books were really his life program. And the life of St. John of Tobolsk was his life program too. St. John of Tobolsk refused to make social visits. He refused to take part in any official lunches or dinners. So the powerful of the world would get very upset that this bishop does not take part in their banquets. And St. John of San Francisco, he was very much in that way, and he also bore his cross. The book about the cross speaks about a girl who goes to the forest, and she meets an angel, and she just asks him questions. Why is life so hard? Why do we have to bear a cross? Can we switch our cross? Can we deny our cross? What kind of crosses there are? And the angel gives him all these answers. It's a really good book. And St. John of Shanghai, believe me, he had a lot of crosses. After he finished law school, it was the revolution, and his family fled to Belgrade, to Yugoslavia, and there he was a paper boy, and that's how he supported the family. And he also enrolled into the theological faculty, and people remember how he used to kind of always be late to class. He would come in, he wore the same clothing, and right away he would take out a notebook, and he would scratch something, and all the students wondering what he's writing. It was very hard, not very legible. And then sometimes he'd fall asleep, being tired. In 1926, after finishing theological studies, he became a monastic. He was 30 years old. And his first assignment was a teacher at the Beetle, not Beatles, B-E-A-T-L-S-E, seminary that came later in the 70s or 60s, but Beetle, B-I-T-O-L, a seminary in Yugoslavia. And he became a teacher there, and he taught pastoral theology, he taught liturgics. And in the latest book I've compiled, there are really interesting memoirs by Serbian and Macedonian seminarians. And let's see, some of the new things that have come up is he wasn't popular among the staff. They really disliked him. And they were very jealous of him because the students loved him. And he was a father to the students. He would cover them at night. He'd It's something like the check committee here. If it's late at night, they'll check your room to make sure you're under your covers, that you're warm and not hungry. And so it's kind of like that. And if anybody was sick, he'd bring them medicine, he'd bring them tea himself anytime at night. If any student was sick, he would go to the doctor. He would take care of him as his own children. And sometimes people say monastics, they're kind of egoistic, but they have a lot of children, and they can have a lot of children and brothers. And the staff didn't really like that because, and he was soft, and he was a good teacher. And one student recounts that he knew the gospel by heart. He would just quote things verbatim. And the time he would get most excited is during Great Lent. And he'd come to classes in the first week of Lent, and he'd say, it's Lent. And he was just so overjoyed, and he was enthusiastic about the topic, the subject, and he was loving. And of course, the students, young people, respond to love and to attention. And when he left, when he was made a bishop, there was a Russian archimandrite, and it's embarrassing to us Russians, who made an announcement after his departure, and he said the following. He said, now that this nechist, this evil, now that the evil has left for the East, he didn't name him, now we can have discipline back in our seminary and have a regular order. So I was surprised at that. And there's another little thing that a Macedonian or Serbian seminarian remembered. We wonder how St. John slept. And in those days, they didn't have T-shirts with kind of write, I don't sleep. So people didn't really know. And he'd wear it under a cassock even if he had one. So people still wouldn't know how he sleeps. So, people ask me, well, what did he do? I didn't tell you. He didn't, from the time he became a monk till 66, he never again, except maybe once, lay down in a bed. I can tell you about that case later, there was one time he lay down to sleep. So he was a stylite. You know what a stylite is? It's not a ballpoint pen. Anybody know what a stylite is? Come on, guys.
Monk that's on the top of a pillar.
Only a monk?
Anyone, actually.
Yeah. So it's somebody, the answer was it's somebody on top of a pillar. Any other answers? It's a very rare form of asceticism. You could name, on one hand, you could count St. Nicholas the Stylite, Simeon the Stylite, Daniel the Stylite. Any other Stylites? I think there's just 3 or 4 in the whole history of the Christian church. And he was really a stylite because stylite is vertical. And we are horizontal. Even in this hall, a couple of you are becoming horizontal. Father Victor, some of us are becoming horizontal right now. And he was vertical. And one bishop we had visiting, he said it's so unusual to see St. John's relics horizontal because all his life was vertical. But, we assume he fell asleep in his armchair. He fell asleep during the day. He fell asleep on the clearest of services. And we assume he fell asleep during prayer on his knees, but we have no video record of that. But the student said he would write letters in the evenings and prepare his classes, and sometimes the students would see him fall asleep on the desk for 10-15 minutes. So he'd be writing, put his head down, he'd fall asleep for 15 minutes, then he would keep writing, and the whole night could go that way with these 15-minute snoozes on the desk. After he became a higher monk, he served the Divine Liturgy every day. And he communed every single day, and he never missed a service. If he missed a service, he would have his service books with him, the Menane and the Octoiv, and he would take them on a train or on a bus. I asked the deacon who used to drive him in San Francisco, Father Nicholas, I said, Father Nicholas, did St. John ever talk about food? And the deacon had a deep voice. It was, food? You gotta be kidding. Never a word about food. He said, well, like, didn't you want to stop for ice cream or something, like with the subdeacons? He says, never. So I said, well, what did he do? He said, well, he usually fell asleep right away, and he'd give the altar boys in the back seat a book of hours, and he would say, read the 9th hour. And they would read, and he would correct their mistakes, so he would be half asleep. So for him, the services were really, really central, and of course, as St. John of Kronstadt, it's the liturgy, it's the Eucharist that gave him life. And the first person to attest to the sanctity of, well, this is a really rare photograph. It's the first one I've seen like this. And I got this from Macedonia through it's going to be the cover of the new book. The first person who attested to St. John's sanctity was St. Nicholas Velimirovich, the great Serbian saint. He wrote the 2 volumes. The prologue, yeah. The prologue. And he was here in the United States. He was a bishop here. Somebody asked him, some kids asked him, these saints were a long time ago. Do saints still exist? And he said, if you want to see a living saint, walking saint, go to Beetle, to the seminary, and you'll see the small man who is, full of grace and is a real witness to God's power. St. John taught at the seminary for a few years, and then he was called to Belgrade, and there seemed to have been a mistake. The Synod of Bishops decided to elevate a hierarch John to the episcopacy, and he came to Belgrade, and he was going to explain to the bishops that they put the wrong address. It's another hierarch John. And the bishop said, no, it's you. And he says, but I have a defect which does not allow me to be a bishop. And they said, what defect? He said, I have a speech impediment. And they said, so did Moses, you're fine. And he became a bishop. He was consecrated a bishop. It was the last episcopal consecration of Metropolitan Anthony Kropavitsky. And at the age of 38, he became the bishop, and he was sent to China. That's also an interesting story. The people in China, there was a big emigre colony in Harbin. They had 40 churches. They had a Russian Polytechnical Institute, and they had the theological faculty of St. Vladimir. That's where Metropolitan Filaret studied, and Father Rostislav Gan from Australia. And they would get a double education, polytechnical and theological at the same time, a dual program. And they offered Metropolitan Anthony to retire or to come to China, where he would have a lot of support and where they would take care of him. And Metropolitan Anthony wrote, I'm too old, but I will send you a piece of my heart. And his name is Bishop John. And so Bishop John was sent here. So here's the Holy Trinity Church, the contemporary, how it looks today. That was built by the Russians. That's where Metropolitan Anthony Kropavitsky is buried. And that's a photograph of St. John on the day of his consecration. And these 2 brothers are the Bartashevich brothers. One was Bishop Leonti, the tall one, of Geneva. And he was really special. He was considered to be Metropolitan Anthony's successor as first hierarch of the Russian Church, but he died very young. And his brother, Archbishop Anthony, he was also in Geneva after Bishop Leonti. And he's a very beloved, was a very beloved bishop and a true disciple of Metropolitan Anthony, who was in his theological circles and groups. And so St. John comes to Shanghai. In the new book, there are memoirs, and I think they're the best, by a woman from New Jersey. She's in New Jersey now, Valentina Harvey. I don't know if anybody knows her. She attends the Lakewood Parish. And they're really simple. And they're almost like a kid wrote them, but she remembers everything, and she really loved him. And she remembers, like, people in school were talking, we're getting a new bishop, we're getting, who is this guy? And she remembers how he arrived and how the girls were talking about him. And then she remembers everything, and I'll quote her a few times, some of the things she did, because she also had guts and character. So St. John arrived in Shanghai. It was a pretty divided Russian colony. If few people were at each other's necks. There were a couple of parishes which were not kind of in full communion with the other parishes. And St. John came, and through his prayers, and he united the colony. But a lot of people did not like him. A lot of people did not like St. John. He had a strong will. A lot of people complained that his services are way too long. They complained that he doesn't look like a bishop. He wears raggedy clothes. They said this guy is weird. He's walking around barefoot. He was strict, and he talks to kids, and he doesn't give honor to the powerful people and people who have a lot of influence. And there was actually at the council, Sabor of 1936 in Rimsky Karlovtsa, there was actually an official request from the Общественность, from the Russian social circles in Shanghai, to remove this embarrassment from China. And St. John was the secretary at the council, and he had to read this about himself. He had no problems. So you know, it tells us that saints they don't have to be. I interviewed an archimandrite who was close to St. John, Father Ambrosi Pagodin. And I said, well, what was St. John like? And he says, you know, Father, with the saints give rest, but don't you dare live with them. Со святыми упокой, но не дай Боже с ними жить. So it's not always easy to live next to a saint and to see him every day, because he can see through you, and the standard that's set is very, very high. But a lot of people did love him, and especially the kids and the young people. And that's because you folks, you have gifts. I mean, you're ready to, you young people have the ability to commit and to follow your dreams. We're older, it's much harder for us to move, to make changes. We have a certain lifestyle, certain habits. And young people, if they have an ideal, they don't care about money, if it's a higher ideal. And one thing young people can't stand is hypocrisy. And sometimes young people see hypocrisy in family life, in church life, and that turns them off. And young people can see faults in people, but they don't want to see hypocrites and falsehood. And young people have a very good sense for that. And I think with St. John, you know, their inner sense told them that this is for real. You know, this is a real person, and this is real love. And he was able to conquer their hearts. A few words about reverence. You know, it's something we don't talk about that much. Благоговение in Russian. St. John and a lot of the saints that had incredible reverence. Can somebody define reverence for me? Come on, girls. Guys, can somebody give me a definition? If somebody, what does reverence mean? A reverent person. Come on, wake up. Drink some Red Bull. What? No, holiness is different than reverence. Holiness will include reverence as a, you will not find a holy person who's irreverent. That's for sure. Yes?
Respect and deference. That's to be reverent.
Yeah, what's the second word?
Deference.
Yeah, that's good. Any other additional synonyms or words to describe reverence? Reverence is a sense, yes?
To respect and honor something.
That's good too. It's everything you've said basically. It's a, yes?
Like the feeling you have for like holy objects or things like that.
Yeah, that's very good. It's a sense of holiness and propriety. And a reverent person will not put an icon on a chair. You put your derrière on the chair. Anybody from Quebec will understand that. But you don't put an icon or a mitre on a chair. You don't put a cross on the floor. You have a sense of, it's an inner feeling. And so if somebody has reverence, when they serve the liturgy, it's very different. You could be a priest and do everything right and brilliantly in tone, but if you don't have reverence, it's not very good. Same thing with the choir. You could have the best sounding choir, but if it's in between the pieces you joke and you text, that means there is no reverence, and your singing loses. You will sing twice as good. Your singing will bring a harvest and results if you have reverence. And sometimes you go to a church and you think, the service is not perfect, but you feel there's such a sense of the fear of God and of reverence that you just want to cry. So that's a very important thing that also St. John had. And when he'd come to a church, when a bishop visits any church, he's supposed to go into the altar, and in old Russia, they would do two things for visiting bishop. They would open the antiments. Does everybody know what an antiments is? Can somebody explain to us? Or what is an antiments? Antimensian. It's something you can't have liturgy with. Not seminarians, keep a low profile, please. Yes?
Something you can't have liturgy without.
Well, our brain. The brain is not, no, can you be a little more concrete?
Isn't it a signed, copy of, what's it called? Of the Holy Shred?
Yeah, you're pretty close, young man. Yeah. Okay, in a nutshell, in a way it is. When in the early church, which was persecuted, the early Christians used to hide, and they used to serve liturgy in the catacombs. And where would they serve? They would serve on a tomb of one of the martyrs, one of their people who died and confessed our Lord until death. And later on, when Christianity became legal during the rule of Emperor Constantine, this practice was continued. A piece of a holy relic of a martyr would be put into holy table. So as the early Christians served on the tombs of the martyrs, in the same way, Christians till this day, today we had a liturgy, and we have a special cloth, and that cloth both gives a priest permission to serve, but it also contains a relic of a martyr. So up to this day, we serve the liturgy the exact same way that the Christians of the first century served. And the martyr's blood is considered the seed of the church. The church is best. We are best Christians when we're persecuted. That's when we're the best. There's no hanky-panky. It's serious business, because you can be taken tomorrow and that's it. And so that's really the best time. And the more Christians were persecuted, the faster the church spread out. By the 4th century, Christianity spread through the whole empire. It's amazing, with no newspapers, no radio stations, no iTunes store, and it worked. Okay, so St. John, a bishop, what happens, he comes into the church, the antiments is open, the bishop checks if it's correct, if it's ribbed, but St. John would check if there are crumbs. And there was a Georgian, very venerated Georgian metropolitan, I think Melchizedek, and he would say he would determine whether the priest is pious. If there were crumbs on the antimensin, he would say he's an impious priest. And he would also judge the priest by the condition of the altar. If the altar was spotless and everything was set up well, he would say this is a God-fearing priest, because that is the most important part of the church. And St. John would always check out the antiments. Okay, our time is running fast. Okay, we're back to Shanghai, daily services. St. John noticed that there are a lot of homeless people, that there are a lot of kids who are left on the street. In 1943, the Chinese government mobilized women for military service. So if they were single mothers, or the husband was dead, they would just leave the kids, and he would find children on the street. So he opened up orphanages. There's a case where there was an alcoholic who had a baby, and he was in no shape to take care of this baby. St. John didn't even know where he got a baby, and he traded him. He gave him a bottle of vodka for the child, and then he took the child into the orphanage. And there were Russian families which were not able to make ends meet, or there were a lot of children, and they would also, they wouldn't give up their children, but their children would live at the orphanage and would be taken care of. There were about 20,000 Russians in Shanghai. Okay, let's see where we are. Okay, this is St. John in his office, and that's the photograph of St. John's time. That's the cathedral he built in honor of the Mother of God, the Surety of Sinners. But I picked this picture because of the rickshaw. I'll tell you two stories from Shanghai, one about honoring parents. So Val Harvey, in her memoirs, she had a fight with her mother. She must have been about 14. And she said, "I'm leaving home." And she took off. And she lived near the cathedral, and she met St. John by chance. And he said, "What did you do to your mother? What did you tell your mother?" And he really reprimanded her. He really let her, he was very strict. And he gave her first of all, he told her, "You must go and ask forgiveness." And secondly, he gave her a penance to come to the daily Vesper service at the cathedral for 10 days, and to stand throughout the service on her knees in front of the icon of her saint, Saint Valentina. And then she came home and she said, "Mom, why did you tell Vladika John?" And her mother said, "I didn't." Second story of Val Harvey is her friend got sick, and she immediately went to St. John and she said, "So-and-so is sick from my class." And St. John said, "Let's go there." And she said, "We have to hurry." And so St. John, he walked everywhere. And she says, "Let's hire a rickshaw." A rickshaw, it's like the Chinese version of Uber at the time. So St. John said, "That's not necessary." And she tells him, "Well, you're denying this man income so he can feed his family, Vladika. You're not giving him work." So St. John said, "Okay, we're hiring him." So he hired the rickshaw. And he said, "Follow us." And he kept walking. And then Val, she had guts, and she said, "You know, we're walking so slow, he could have 2 customers." And but she learned a lesson that St. John could not allow another human, a human to carry a human. That was too demeaning for an image of God to carry another human like an animal would carry a human. So there are a lot of these little stories. Here are some of the orphans, up here and up here. I'm skipping a lot of stuff, I'm just telling you. When the Russians in China had no passports, because they had been Russian passport holders, but Russia did not exist. They did not have Soviet passports. They didn't have Japanese passports. The Japanese had a presence in China. There's a good movie called Shanghai, and it gives you an idea of how the situation that took place in Shanghai with the Chinese, with the British presence, and with the Japanese. And later on, Japan entered into war with China. And when the communists came to power in Shanghai, the Russians basically had to leave, and part of the flock went back to Russia. St. John did not really bless them. I mean, he didn't. He foresaw what will happen to them. I mean, he blessed their trip and their choice, but he didn't really approve of their decision. And so most of the people stayed with St. John, and as Moses led out his people from captivity, in the same fashion, St. John led his people out of the second communist captivity in China. And since these people had no documents, they were received on an island in the Philippines, the Tubabawa Islands, and they lived there for 27 months. And that place has typhoons all the time. And in the course of 27 months, there was not one typhoon. And there was one typhoon which was heading towards the island, and all of a sudden it changed course. By the way, I had a case where in Florida there was not a typhoon, but what do you have in Florida? Hurricane was approaching Florida, and Mr. Ustinov, Matushka Mackenzie's father, called me, and he says, please serve a malevin to St. John because it's not looking good. And I'm kind of just like a telephone wire, so just do what people tell me. It's their request, and St. John hears it, but you do need a wire. Now it's wireless too, but he hears that too. And we did a malevin, and that hurricane turned. There was actually a miracle in Quebec when they were going to separate from Canada, and as the voting was taking place, it was very close, and the separatists were leading. And I got a call from a friend, and he was in Ontario, and he said, Father Peter, I can't imagine Canada without Quebec, and I beg you, do a service to St. John. And I went right away, and I did a malevin, and all of a sudden the votes began adding up for the pro-unity movement, and they won the federal. This was, I think, the special referendum. I don't remember what year that was. So St. John's prayer is very powerful. You know, sometimes people ask the priest at the cathedral, are there miracles? And I said, for us, miracles are normal. I mean, if there's no miracle, then it's strange. But every single day, things happen, just unbelievable things, and we're kind of used to it. But it's really amazing, and especially when I remember a woman on a Thursday calls me and she says, Father, I have cancer of the breast. Will you be there on the weekend? And she flew from Toronto, Romanian woman, and she found out about cancer on Thursday. She got a ticket on Friday. She was in San Francisco on Saturday on her knees in front of the relics. And then she told me, if they remove one breast, I'm going to ask them to remove both breasts. I don't want to deal with this. And we prayed and talked, and she stayed in the church. And at the beginning of the year, I brought some relics to this reliquary to Toronto. And at the vigil, a woman walks up to me, and she looks familiar, and she's smiling, and she's beaming. And I look at her, and I recognize her, and I go, Sylvia. She goes, yes, and I went like this. And she went like this. And they're there. They're there, and you may find it, but it's fantastic. And she said nothing was removed, and it's just unbelievable what happened. The thing is, we had to use signals so nobody would suspect anything. So that's why we had to use the sign. So, okay, we're on to Tubabawa. Any more pictures? Yeah. So you see, in Tubabawa, they had a whole tent city. They had a tent cathedral. They had a tent theater. They had opera company. They had team sports. And a lot of people from Tubabawa, they say, they have homes in San Francisco. They have cottages. But they say the best time of our life was in Tubabawa. And St. John, in order for the people to get refugee status, he began flying, coming to the United States, and that's how he came to Washington. And during his visit here, he met up with the Russian community, and that's how he founded the first parish. And he met with representatives of the government, and I guess he prayed, and he met with people, and he wrote. He was a very good writer. He was a lawyer, and his decrees are unbelievable. I mean, they're very short to the point, and he wrote hundreds of decrees. One time he left a staff in a church, and upon getting home, he wrote a decree. After serving the Divine Liturgy at the St. Sergius Church, we left our staff at the church, and he would write a decree for any tonsure he would make to reader. And he was a lawyer, and he wrote very well, and his theological articles are very precise, because if you make a mistake in a legal document, there are consequences. And he also didn't want to make any errors, especially in theology. And he was a very pure theologian. And besides his educations, he was very versed in the services. And his opponents, or people to whose articles and theological works he responded to, they couldn't, I mean, to challenge him, they would have to know the Menean and Aktoichus almost by heart. And he always had that edge. And of course, he had the edge because professional theologians did not serve the divine liturgy every day. And so with the liturgy, he always had that extra grace and that extra edge. And he had the living experience of the faith rather than theoretical. And after 2 years, these people received refugee status, and they came to the United States. Most of them moved to, the ones in Russia, most of them ended up in Novosibirsk. Well, I mean, they ended up in Siberia for other reasons. But eventually they settled down in Yekaterinburg, Novosibirsk, and there was even an alumni, not an alumni, but there still exists a group of people who lived in Shanghai and Harbin, or there's the Alumni Association of the Harbin Polytechnical Institute, and it still exists. And a lot of those people have memoirs and a lot of them write, we should have listened to St. John as far as our life choices. But the majority of the people moved either to Australia or to the San Francisco area. And St. John was assigned to Western Europe. So a lot of the people who didn't like St. John, who even signed petitions after he took care of his flock, after he led them out, they changed their minds and they became very dedicated to him. And truly, his flock from Shanghai after the Tubagawa experience, they trusted him and they truly had him as his father in most cases. After his assignment to Western Europe, he continued to serve every day, to visit parishes. And here's Paris Church Choir. He used to go to the Lesna convent a lot. This is in Fourquet, before Provemont. And there he's in England, in Bradford, with I think that's Father George Sheremetyev, who's holding the Kursk icon. And the bishop is Bishop Nicodim. That's Abbot Elizabeth, who used to be in the High Place Monastery in Jerusalem, and they got kicked out. That's another long story, the orange deal with Russia, Soviet Union. I can tell you later, but they established a community in England, and down there he's in Morocco. So St. John is, he's a global saint. I mean, no, I don't think any other saint visited so many places. So he was born in Imperial Russia. He studied and lived in Serbia. He was a bishop in China. He was in the Philippine Islands. He spent one day in Japan. There was a stop in Japan on a ship. He served in Western Europe, France, Holland. He established the French Orthodox Church, the Dutch Orthodox Church. He was a bishop in the United States. He visited Vancouver, Canada. He served there. And his parents lived in Valencia, Venezuela, so he visited South America. So the only two places he didn't go are Australia, and I don't think he didn't go to the Holy Land, but now he's in the heavenly Zion, so he's in the heavenly Jerusalem. So he visited there, not literally. So no other saint probably traveled so much. Father Victor's Matchka has a little interesting story. Is she here? Oh, then I can make something up then. She, as a girl, she used to go into camp, and Vladika John would visit the camp, and he would get his own tent, and it was on a little wooden landing. And he talked to the kids, he would serve, but most of the day he would spend in the tent, and he would take his typewriter everywhere. And he would just be typing away. And Father Victor's Matchka says, I was just drawn to him, and all the kids are playing or swimming, playing sports. And she would want to be with him, and she would run up and just sit near his tent, and he wouldn't say anything to her, but he would he would flip peanuts to her like a squirrel, and she said she was just so happy, and he would just be typing away, this guy. And Matchka told me, I'm sure that if he was alive today, would have a MacBook Air. So, he'd be carrying that around. See what we have next here. This is the Memorial Church in Brussels. It's a church which was built by all parishes and by all dioceses of the church abroad in honor of the Tsar Martyr. And up to this day, we make collections to support this parish. That was a synodal decision many, many years ago. And this was the Cathedra, St. John. These are members of the French church he established. They converted. Their leader was a rather controversial figure, Father Yevgraf Kavalievsky. The eyes tell you something, I don't know. But he became a monk, and he was Vladika John's best friends didn't support his decision of making this guy a bishop. So a Romanian bishop took part in the consecration of Bishop John Kavalievsky. And later it proved that wasn't exactly the best decision. St. John made mistakes. A saint is not, what is a saint? Metropolitan Anthony of Suter says a saint is a repentant sinner. In the early church, all Christians were called saints. So sometimes we have this, to become a saint is so hard. And I'm sure, a large percent of our Orthodox mothers are holy. I mean, God knows, and what they put up with you folks. And when we were babies, it was almost impossible. And what they bear from their husbands and the burden they carry. So I'm sure in every parish there are just really holy people, and we just don't even see them, and we can't even imagine what they have to go through and how their hearts bleed and how they bear their cross. But saints made mistakes, and some of them made a lot of mistakes, and and God oftentimes allows us to make priests. We really goof up sometimes, and it's sometimes it's the only way to kind of put us in our places, and we make mistakes and goof up, and when it serves, especially when it concerns human souls. But the sign of a true Christian is to acknowledge his mistakes, to ask forgiveness, and to learn from his mistakes. There are two ways of learning things: through positive experience. I've seen some of the best kids from really dysfunctional families. I mean, these kids are so kind, and they saw such bad stuff at home. When they have families, they're the best. They will never allow to raise their voice towards their wives because they saw all this at home. And I see kids, their parents send them to private schools. They allow them to buy, latest phones, cars, and it's just a nightmare. Just an absolute nightmare that there's no honoring parents, making demands. So it's also like in sports. Some of the best athletes are the ones who lose. Initially. And the loss humbles them and causes them to train more and to learn. And that's probably why the Cleveland Cavaliers won last year, because they lost so much. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing for a good fighter to be knocked down cold. And it's humbling, and it puts things in. It's a little bit like being a driver. So when you begin driving, at first you're very hesitant and scared, and that's bad, because hesitations cause accidents. And then you get sure of yourself. And when you're sure of yourself, that's when you get into an accident. And then after that, you have some experience, you've had this loss, and you kind of straighten out. And it's like that in spiritual life, and there's nothing wrong with that. A thing I discovered while working on my book, and it's I got a box from France from a priest who's actually in schism, and he didn't warn me, and we're not really friends, but as I was working on the book, he asked me some questions about St. John, and I told him I'm working on a book, and all of a sudden I get this big box, and it's St. John's papers from Paris, from his Paris years, and I think they were in the church basement, and nobody cares. And this priest is old. It's Benjamin Zhukov. And I looked through there, and there was a book from Moscow, and all kinds of, and it was mostly things to deal with refugees. And he wrote a letter to the Prime Minister of Australia. I sent that to Australia, and some things I sent to Jordanville, but I found these ledgers. And, well, you can read what it says. He kept a written ledger of every single letter he received. And I have two ledgers, one for incoming for 52 and one for outgoing 55. So in 1952, he received personally 3,259 letters. He entered each one by hand into the ledger. And the outgoing ledger in 1955, he personally wrote, and he usually wrote by hand, 2,579 letters. So I don't know how many Facebook friends he had, but he had a lot of people he wrote to. So this is a photograph of St. John in Jordanville. I really like it. And there aren't too many. He visited Jordanville usually when there was a council of bishops either in Jordanville or in New York. When he came to San Francisco, here's the Washington Parish. And that's a nice color photograph of St. John. And from the church, you walk through these doors this morning. Is that you, Father Victor? No. Okay. And there's St. John with the rector of the parish, Father Nicholas Perekrestov, who was here for many years. And he always used to carry around these bags, and usually it was the holy gifts and an icon. No, he was very short. And these are just places he visited in the US. Fort Ross, that's the first Russian settlement in the United States. That last photo is a new photo. I just dug it up with the help of the best archivist in the church abroad, my son. And that's St. John blessing the church in Jordanville. And guess who's holding the water for him? Hierodeacon Loris, our future metropolitan. Father Cyprian told me a story that when this blessing was taking place, he was finishing painting the church, and St. John walked in, and it's like he was chasing somebody out from some areas of the church, but there was nobody there. It was like, as Father Cyprian says, it was some kind of demons which he saw. And this is also like this photograph. It's St. John with Father Serafim Slobodskoy, the author of The Law of God. And he's in his home in Nyack at the church house. I think Father George Ladin lives there. No, the Slobodskoys were given the house where Father Serafim Slobodskoy lived as a priest. After his repose, the parish gave that house to the family as a gift in gratitude. So that's Father Serafim's house where Matushka lived, Yolachka. And I put in that picture especially for Father Sergei Lidievsky, so to get on his good side, that's St. John and Novodiveeva. And Father Alexander Fedorovsky is still going strong, thank God. And the other person is Father Adrian Rimarenko, who later became Archbishop Andrei of Novodiveeva, who had the gift of clairvoyance. And here's the church that St. John finished the construction of. If I put this in for Vladika Gabriel, because if we have 100 marriages, then San Francisco's one of the best places to have weddings in. I have to say, out of all the services we do it, the marriages get the most compliments from Americans. I mean, people just, they love, and when they enter to the church for marriage, they're just overwhelmed. And we have people coming up and they say, Father, I'm not a believer, I'm not a religious man, but what I saw today, I was moved. And it's really nice to hear, the Russians, or the Orthodox actually, to be frank, they never compliment too much, to be frank. When is the last time you said thank you to your priest? Last year we had an altar boy for Pascha, and he works in Safeway, the liquor department. And he did something, I was so moved. It's the first time any altar boy has done anything of that sort. He dug up a place where they have wine from Cyprus. It's pretty hard to get in our area. And he brought it for the clergy to drink on Pascha. And I thought, wow, this guy has other things to do, but these little things, you see, think about it. When is the last time you gave a priest a little card, a thank you note, an iPhone or something small? The thing is, it's interesting, like American, I drive with our funeral man to the cemetery. And I talk to him, and we talk about different things, and he says, I asked him, do you ever get tipped? Because funeral guys, they have to be around. It's not an easy job. And I was wondering, do you ever get tips? He says, we only get tips from the people, from the Soviets. And they'll bring a bottle of wine, and they'll give an envelope. And I said, do you ever get tipped by the emigres? He said, never. I said, from them, I don't even get a thank you in general. But these people, it's so hard to set up a funeral in Russia. I mean, you have to give bribes. In Russia, to have a funeral, you have to bribe the cemetery keepers, you have to bribe a lot of people. I mean, it's very expensive to have a funeral. In Moscow, to get a plot in an established cemetery is $150,000 and up. And so when they see how easy it is in America, you just call up the funeral home and he does everything for you. They're very grateful. But what I'm trying to say is, when you get older, it's really nice for a priest to hear a thank you or something nice. Not too much, because you'll spoil the clergy, but it's really something nice that people do not think about. And there are people who do it, and I have to say, these people will compliment. The other day we had a daily liturgy, and this woman came, and at the end of the service, she said, Father, thank you for the liturgy. And I was thinking, I don't remember anybody saying those words, thank you for the liturgy. Thank you for being the celebrant of the body and blood of Christ. And I thought, that made my day. So these small things, they're good to they're good to develop. In relationship to anybody, to send a thank you note, and sometimes to say something nice once in a while. And clergy needs to, we're human. We take showers, we eat. We're also human, and it's a nice thing. So probably nobody else will tell you this, so I'm telling you.
Thank you, Father Peter.
You owe me, Father. St. John in San Francisco, he had a little cell. He didn't have a fancy place. This is his room. People came to visit him. He had a bed in his room when he was alive, so he tried to hide. But some woman helped clean and prepare food for him. And women know when a bed has not been made for 2 years, and they know by the dust and that nothing has moved. He had piles of papers. But he was a missionary, and he encouraged using all the languages and the places. In China, he would give exclamations in Chinese, and when he'd go out, look down from heaven above, and I have written transliterations. I couldn't find them for the presentation of, oh boy, time's going. He had transliterations from Chinese to in Russian letters, exclamations. And in France, of course, he established the French church, and in Holland. And he was a very Russian bishop, but he was like Metropolitan Anthony. The church for him was a universal church. And when there were problems or persecution, they were close to his heart. He was not provincial. That's a very important thing, and oftentimes we're very congregational. Who knows what congregational is? Congregationalism is. Anybody from Oregon here? Come on, guys.
So,
What's a congregationalist mentality?
effectively just keeping within your own group.
Yeah, basically you have your own parish, it's your own little world, and nothing else concerns you. We have it good, we have our building, whatever. And but an Orthodox person, he cares about the whole body. And when one part of the body hurts, the whole body hurts. And so an Orthodox mentality is a universal mentality. It's, and the Orthodox Church is not just a parish, it's a whole diocese. And the diocese makes up a local church, and a family of local churches makes up the big church family. And the earthly church unites with the heavenly church, and it's the full church. And it's basically like congregationalism is basically like a little puddle and the ocean, and there's a big difference. So St. John was very universal-minded and very missionary-minded. And he didn't have too many books, but he had about 20 catechisms in different languages, and he had about 20 New Testaments in different languages. His services were long, and he was always late. He was always late, and he wouldn't want the service to start without him. And I can tell you a story which is not printed. I don't think it will be published. If you want to hear it. Who wants to hear it, raise their hands. Okay, who doesn't want to hear it? Okay, you win. Yeah. And this is a story told to me by Father Elias Wen. In China, there was a very holy monk, very, very strict Father Modest. Anybody remember Father Modest from the Holy Land? Igumen Modest, Archimandrit Modest. Yeah. He was very strict, and he was a very worthy monk. I mean, he was way up there. And he was in Tubabawa, and then he was, I think, in Europe. And then he was at the Khram Pametnik. He was a priest there with Father Chidomir Rastoich. And then he was in Jerusalem. But anyways, in Shanghai, people were complaining, Vladika John's always late for the daily services. And they had a parish council meeting with St. John's presence and participation. And they brought up the subject, and everybody decided, including St. John, that he gets a 15-minute grace period. So if a service is at 6, they can start at 6:15 if he's not there. And soon afterwards, they had a service. The church was basically empty during the weekdays. Don't think St. John's services were packed. San Francisco during the weekdays, it was empty when he was there. And it was pretty empty. There weren't too many people on Saturday nights either, although a saint was serving. And the reader was Father Ilya son, a wonderful tenor, Peter Wen. And so Vladika John comes in, and Peter's reading the 6 Psalms, and Father Modest is serving. And he's already, for the 6 Psalms, 3 Psalms, the priest reads his silent prayers in the altar, and for 3 Psalms, he comes out on the ambo, you see his back. And Vladika John comes in, and he sees they started without him. And he tells Peter, stop reading. And Father Modest turns around and says, keep reading. Then St. John stamps his staff, and he says, I said stop reading. And Father Modest turns around and says, I said keep reading. And then Vladika really he wasn't pleased. He was stomping. When he'd get nervous, sometimes he'd stomp his foot. He said, I said stop reading. And Father Modest goes into the altar. He takes off his stole, and he leaves. And they lived in the same church parsonage building. And he doesn't come out day 1. He doesn't come out day 2. He doesn't come out day 3. And on day 3, St. John goes to his room, and he knocks on the door. He opens the door and says, yes. And St. John says, I want to ask your forgiveness. And Father Modest says the following, Vladika, you didn't do anything to me. You disrupted God's service. And Vladika John did a prostration. And that also takes guts and courage and to acknowledge this. So, these are real spiritual heroes. This is so when how did St. John end up in San Francisco? In 2 words, a cathedral was being built. The devil hates the building of a church. probably hates nothing more than another liturgy. And the people began arguing, and there was once part of the parish accused the other side of abusing funds. Construction was stopped. They took things to court. Nothing's happening. It's the biggest parish abroad. It's a scandal. It's an earthquake, a tremor in the life of the church. All eyes are on San Francisco. And what do we do? And there's only one person who has authority, St. John, and they sent him to San Francisco. He arrived in 1962, end of 62. Hugh was in court. He was on, as the chairman of the parish council. And some people hated him. There were women who spat at him, called him names. And he bore all this. And finally the court made a decision that everything is in order, and after about 2 years of the cathedral standing, construction began again. And this is the raising of the crosses with Metropolitan Filaret, and here you could see St. John. Here's Protodeacon Nikolai Porshnikov. And so the first liturgy at the cathedral was in 1966 on the Sunday of Orthodoxy. St. John, read that. These are also powerful words. May no one deny themselves the joy of Pascha by rushing home to partake of meat, rather than commune of the body of Christ. That's what the choice is. Salami, pepperoni, beefsteak, or the body and blood. And it's, I think it's a very powerful image of the choices we make. Here are some color photographs. They were pretty rare at the time. St. John is very hard to paint, iconographers have told me, because look at every single photograph, his expression is somewhat different. So St. John finished the construction of the cathedral, and in 1966, in July, he took a trip to Seattle with the Kursk icon. He had a visit planned. He was 70 years old. And after he arrived in Seattle, he was served the liturgy on a Saturday. After liturgy, he would remain in the altar for a long time. He remained in the altar this day for 3 hours in prayer, and he didn't want to leave the altar. And then he came out. He had coffee or tea with his neighbor. With a neighbor, it's a man who used to serve for Metropolitan Antoni Hrapavitsky. Then he went up to rest before going to the cemetery. And the people who were waiting for him heard a thud. And they went upstairs, and he had fallen on the floor in front of the Kursk icon. And the man that lifted him up, George Kalfov, asked, well, "Are you okay, Vladika? What happened?" And he says, "I don't know. This has never happened to me before." And then he died on the arms of this man, George Kalfov. Then within 24 hours, they had to get his body to California, because if you don't embalm, that's the federal requirement. And so St. John's body was brought back 50 years ago. He was met at the airport. He lay in state. He was not embalmed. He lay in state for about 6 days. His funeral was an evening funeral. I think I'm going to have to wrap it up more or less. I have a lot of stories, and I never met St. John during his life, but we kind of became friends after I ended up in San Francisco. Actually, before moving to San Francisco, my wife and I were debating what we should do, because it was a very difficult decision to be far from family. And I told my wife, but this wasn't the reason, but I did have a dream. And we're not supposed to believe in dreams, but I had a dream that we're going down into the sepulcher and we're opening up the relics. And then 13 years later, a decision was made to canonize St. John. It was a grassroots movement that addressed the Synod of Bishops, and they decided to, it was also a miracle that our Metropolitan Vitali agreed to this, and he said, let's do it right away. And it was decided for St. John to be canonized, and the protocol in the Orthodox Church is to investigate relics, their condition, if there's a canonization. If the relics would not be whole and incorrupt, that would not be a reason not to canonize. Although Saint Seraphim's relics were just bones, and the synod almost decided not to canonize him for that reason. And the bishop who pushed it through was Metropolitan Serafim Chichagov, who wrote a special report on the basis of the practice of the Universal Church and the Greek Church that this is not a requirement of holiness. On Mount Athos, they don't pay attention whether relics are corrupt or incorrupt. They look at the color of the bones. And if the bone is honey-colored and the person had a righteous life, it means he's a God-pleaser. If the bones are black and dark, it means probably not. And so a decision was made in 1993 to canonize St. John, and Archbishop Anthony, one day he calls some of the clergy. Archbishop Anthony used to like to call the young clergy, I don't know why, but he used to call me, Father Serge Kotar, and Father Stefan Pavlenko. Those are the three he'd call at any time. He said, I have to talk to you, I have to talk to you. And we'd have to drop everything and come. And he would tell us he would share with us what is, some questions or issues, and he would say, what do you think? What do you think? He would always ask us what we think. And we'd say what we think, and then he'd make a decision on his own, but I think he needed somebody to share with, and he liked us. I mean, he loved us. And then he said, we're going to investigate the relics. I've invited Archbishop Loris, whom he was close to, 16 people. On October 11th, went down into the sepulchre, and we opened the casket. But you probably know all these things, how, probably, I don't know. Have you opened caskets of dead people? How many of you have opened caskets of dead people 25 years after their repose? Can you raise your hands? Only one, okay. So it was kind of scary, and I don't want to take up your time, but it was scary, because you don't know what to expect. Is there going to be an odor? What is the condition? Is it going to look scary? But in a nutshell, the relics were open, they were covered. St. John's vestments basically rotted through, the casket was rusty. And I remember Archbishop Anthony, I remember exactly. There are moments in your life you remember every second. And I remember he crossed himself like this, he leaned over and he lifted the air that covers the face, and like everybody's just standing there, nobody's moving and nobody's saying a word, for minutes. And I'm looking, and I go, he's incorrupt, and I finally get to see him. So later on, the relics were washed, prepared, and in 1994, St. John was canonized. These are his relics. I was the photographer, and I had a cheap camera, but this is what we have when we took the relics out of the casket. And I ran home to get some film, and the clergy lives near the cathedral, and all the young wives are waiting, and the kids know what's happening. First, Vladika said, don't tell anybody. And we go, how can we not tell our wives? And they're going to be asking, where are we, and what's happening, and what is this? And he said, okay, just tell your wives. So we told them. So I returned home to get the film, and the lights are on everywhere. I think our kids weren't asleep, and I was going, he's incorrupt. And it's, I expected an answer. Truly, he is incorrupt, indeed, because it was like Pascha, And this is the canonization service. Metropolitan Vitali is opening the relics. First, the icon. It's held up by a representative of the monastics. The present Bishop Agapit is called, and Father Gregory Nauminka, because he's my brother-in-law, so that's some perks. And they're holding up the icon of St. John. And then we remove the cover of the relics themselves. Vladika Vitali, I watched him very closely. And he kind of jumped back. It was almost like lightning hit him. I don't think he expected the relics to be the way they are. That's my opinion. Absolute silence. You know, over 1,000 people in church, and it's just it's like the silence of Holy Saturday in a sense. And you'll hear Father Eugene Burbello was there. And you say, Paklon. Archbishop Anthony didn't serve. He read the canon, and he wrote the service to St. John, and he had the key from the cover. So Vladika Vitali sees the relics for the first time. Vladika Anthony is telling him prostration. And the first magnification to St. John. A lot of these people are not alive anymore. I have a lot of stuff. There's lipstick stuff for girls, a lot of stuff dating. St. John, he tried to set up young people. He actually sponsored parties for young people. At the St. Tikhon, he would give them money. Again, as Vladika Gavril said, in order to marry somebody, you have to know them and you have to, be friends. And he would come down and watch. They say when he came down to a party, they would turn off the wild music, the foxtrots, and they would put on the waltzes. And as soon as he would leave, they would put the foxtrot on again. So I think that's it. There's one more thing. This is a picture for Russia, and they include St. John in this in the rank of saints of the Russian Church. Here's a photograph. We, in the course of the 20 years since the glorification, we revested the vestments once, not out of necessity, but because somebody asked. There's a church being built in honor of St. John in Tver. And they asked if we commission vestments for St. John, can you give us his old vestments? And Vladika Kirill agreed. He's not, but the vestments we have now, I wouldn't trade them for anything because they're. And so he was revested, and you could see his hair. What's interesting is when he died, another detail I found out, when he died in Seattle, the people who took him down the stairs, there were 4 to 6 people. Somebody was carrying his staff in front. The 2 people witnessed that it was like carrying a chest of lead. these were young men, Nikolai Lukyanov, Georgy Karpov. It was just unbelievable that 4 to 6 healthy men could not carry him. They thought they would fall. And after the liturgy the next day, they had an early liturgy on Sunday. When they took him from the St. Nicholas Cathedral to the funeral car, he was light as a feather. And this is a final shot, just of some people who knew St. John. You could read it attentively. Okay, I can tell who has a sense of humor, who doesn't. Anyways, I have some icons to give out all of you, and there's one more thing. I'm going to finish now, and I don't know if there's time for questions, but I would like to show you a film of St. John himself. And I took all the footage I have, and there's a little more footage I have to find, and I put it all together. And you see his face, and you see his expressions. It's really, if we have time, if Shek allows me.
Of course, Papa. Of course.
Yes. I think it's very special. I mean, to see, a living saint walking around and serving and smiling and talking to altar boys. So I can show that to you right now. St. John and Seacliff. This is in the internet. That's where I got it. When St. John came, this is what the cathedral looked like. And here they're beginning the continuation of the construction with the 11. After the church was finished on the outside, there was a procession on Balboa Street from St. Tikhon's home along the streets along Balboa to the cathedral for the raising of the crosses. This is one of St. John's biggest friends and supporters, Bishop Nektari of Seattle, Kansevich, spiritual son of Elder Nectarius of Orthodox. composer in Moscow, very gifted. He wrote this is the Kontakion from the Akatis to St. John, and he wrote a special composition for. We did our recording of the Akatis. Maxim Kologorov. Here's the last set. It's from the Palo Alto parish. Founding of the church, blessing of the foundation, and then the consecration after this. Last audio will be from the Lesna convent. Thank you for your attention and. In this case, the person we give these out to people, there's probably enough to take a few.
Any questions?
I'm ready for questions, but you have discussion groups, or
That's okay.
or one option would be.
This is a discussion.
So
Question.
if you do have questions, you're welcome about St. John or anything else. Yes?
Orthodox John spent, I think, like 10 years in Western Europe.
Yes, about the saints.
Why is his title only San Francisco and Shanghai? He spent only 3 years in San Francisco. And his title should be Shanghaiski, Zapadny Европейский, San Francisco. I mean, and you know, those 10 years in Europe are almost always ignored, it seems.
I didn't mention that one of the greatest things that St. John did in Western Europe was that he reinstated the veneration of Western saints in the Russian Orthodox Church. In our church calendar, the Western pre-schism saints were almost totally forgotten. And when St. John, as a friend of the saints, when he ended up in Europe, he would visit. He loved history. You know, there are two things he liked to talk about was theology, the church services, and history. He didn't like rumors. He didn't like to talk about people. When he visited Father Seraphim Slobodskoy, Father Seraphim asked him, "Who are these people who are the cause? Who's causing all these problems in San Francisco?" And he expected names, and St. John answered quietly, "The devil." Or in Seattle, when he would visit Mr. Yuri Khrushchev, Mr. Khrushchev would begin, he knew the people in San Francisco, and he knew the troublemakers, and he would bring up this topic, and every time St. John would fall asleep. But in Europe, I don't know how I got off on this. So he liked history. He was a history buff, especially Russian history. He even has an article on Ivan the Terrible, which many people are looking for. He would come to a place, he'd be interested. What's the history of this city? Where's this church? Есть ли там святыня? Are there holy things there? And he found out that there are so many holy relics in Europe. So he wrote a memo to the synod with a list of. I was going to print out a list. I've forgotten, but saints like Saint Genevieve of Paris. And now the church in Russia has also accepted, this list of saints, and they are being venerated again. And especially, it's good for Orthodoxy because, many people are brought up in the West. They have their own saints, and they can visit them. Why is he ignored? It's hard to say because, let's say from St. John's China period, there's really not too many people who wrote about him from the Chinese immigration. Besides little snippets of memoirs, of personal memoirs, there's really nothing substantial that one would kind of expect. And in a way, if a place doesn't have its own chroniclers, it's a little hard for, to maintain somebody's veneration or for people to know about them. So I think there were war years. The Russians were quite poor in Europe, and I don't know, just by circumstance, probably the converts have more memoirs about him than even many of the Russians. That's what it seems like. Why is he San Francisco and Shanghai and San Francisco? Because he began in Shanghai and he finished in San Francisco, and they didn't really want a long title. I'd been to Europe, and I think it's Mikhail Artsimovich says, Shanghaiский, Западноевропейский, он наш. So I don't think I just think it's just the only reason was really to make his title a little bit shorter, the beginning and the end.
San Francisco's a long word.
Well, и Калифорнийский then. So yeah, any more questions? No,
Yes, but we know that Orthodox John, of course, was associated with miracles during his life and after, and even to this present day. Are there any miracles that stand out in your experience with dealing with people who are asked for prayers, or maybe ones that you've heard of during his life?
probably the most common, what the most common requests for, I mean, I personally like it if somebody asks for a malebin, and especially if somebody has come from somewhere. I really like it when they tell me what they want to pray for, what caused them to come from Washington or from Geneva. Is it were they just by chance, or did they make a special trip, for a special reason? So I like that. I even have, we have 3 priests, but I kind of even have an interactive map in my mind. There are pockets of places which have incredible veneration for St. John, and there are places which, for example, I don't think I've ever received a letter from certain cities, ever, from parishes. So it's very interesting, I think, where the parish priest not promotes, but he has a great love for St. John themselves. He talks about him, and then people want to come. It's like a priest who's been to the Holy Land and loves it, and organizes a pilgrimage. Ultimately, his whole parish would just love the Holy Land, and they'll want pilgrimage every year. So, what was your question, Ludica? I listened to a lot of rock music. What was your question?
About miracles.
Miracles, yeah. So, the categories of miracles are probably the most common are illness, and number 1, of course, is cancer. Finding a spouse is really, really common. Green card and documentation. I mean, I know Brooklyn streets by heart because there are a lot of people, problems with children, substance abuse, help in a spiritual state, help out of depression. Those are the most common requests. But, just a little, there's a Romanian family that was in the United States, and because of a glitch, they received permission to stay here for 5 years, and they're working for a parish. But because of a glitch, they didn't take, the process started at one time, and then about a year later, they got permission for 5 years, but for some reason the countdown was from the day they petitioned. So they lost a year in their stay, in their legal stay in the United States. And I remember these people, they were down, they were helping the parish, their kids are in the United States, they're working, and they were being deported. And before being deported, they tried all avenues. They had lawyers, everything. The guy said it's hopeless. It's hopeless, you're out. And before leaving, they came to San Francisco. To say goodbye to St. John, and we did a service, they prayed, and they live in a place called Ben Lomond. It's in Santa Cruz Mountains, about an hour and a half south of San Francisco. And they told me their story, and saw their children, rather distraught, and then they returned to Ben Lomond. And then I get a phone call, and they said, the FedEx has delivered the tickets. And then they said, and we checked their email, and the Department of Immigration has given us permission to stay. So it's like it was timed. The email came when they got home, I assume, and right after the Malebin, and they didn't even ask, or maybe they did in their prayers. But so there's a lot of cancer cures, of course, are powerful. Or a girl from Washington was at our church before Great Lent this year. And I don't want to give away too many details, but maybe people know, but it's not really a secret, I don't think. And she didn't have good luck the first time, a professional woman, and she was at our church before Great Lent, and she was at services, she went to confession, communion, and not to me, so I wasn't aware of what's happening. And then she asked for Malebin, and she asked me to serve the Malebin, and she didn't say what for. So I served it, and she prayed, and she left. And after Pascha, I was visiting my parents in Montreal in May, and I get an email, and it's from this girl, and she says, I gave St. John a promise And remember, you served the Molebin. I promise that if my personal life is resolved, I will get married next to his relics. And we ask you to marry us as soon as possible. And so she found her second half, but she was proactive. She, after the Molebin, she went on Match.com. She filled out a profile, but she wanted only a Russian man, only an Orthodox man. And there were only 4 people that came up. And the first 3 guys were, I guess they were losers or something. I don't know. Well, they didn't click. She's devout. Father Victor knows who this is. Yes, Father? Do you know? Yeah. And the fourth one, after the phone call, they were on Skype in the afternoon, and that weekend he flew out here from a few thousand miles, and they came to San Francisco, and we married them. So,
Now she's organizing the Tatiana ball with her husband.
well, don't give her away. Yeah. So and it's wonderful when people tell us. I mean, when people have problems, they tell us. Again, the priest. That link. When they have problems, they tell it. Like somebody will say, pray for someone who has cancer, and we pray and we put them on a list. And if it's a child, he's in my mind. And if they send a photograph, he's embedded in my brain for a certain period of time because you see a sick child and it's especially moving. And then let's say the person dies, they don't tell us. Could be 2 years, he could be on our get well list, and they don't even tell us. So it's important to kind of, if something has worked, it's really good for the priest to know, and it's a joy. I mean, you think, I'm a little screw in this whole process of this joy, and it's for the glory of God. So, and these things happen just constantly every week. There's a little boy who came from Oregon, and he needed an operation. He was about 3 years old. He wasn't speaking yet, or barely speaking. And no, he didn't come. I'm sorry, he didn't come from Oregon. He lived in Oregon, and his uncle was Orthodox, and he was Orthodox too. His uncle brought him some oil from St. John, and the boy's mother, before the operation, anointed his ear with this oil. The boy was going deaf, and she didn't tell the boy anything. I mean, he's a 3-year-old kid, so she just anointed him. And this is before St. John's canonization. And then he went to the doctor, the last visit, the final visit before surgery, and the doctor said, we don't know what happened, but he needs no surgery. He's perfectly fine. And then, soon afterwards, the family was praying before their family icons, and the little 3-year-old who barely speaks pointed at St. John's photograph, not icon, and he says, Mama, this man make my ear better. So out of the mouth of babes. And or another case, beautiful, this lady comes and she wants to talk to me. She didn't ask for Molebin, she wanted to talk to me, and she says, I'm expecting a child and he has Down syndrome, and my husband wants him aborted, and I'm not sure. And I was under the impression, we just had a visit from one of the sisters from the St. Elizabeth convent, and they put out a movie about their work with children with Down syndrome. And one of the nuns said the following. She said, when God speaks to us, he speaks to our hearts, but we filter things through our mind. So we distort them. God sends us a message. And when we put it through our corrupt minds, we distort it in the sense, this is not real, this is not beneficial, this is not going to work. And we're rational. And so the true message of God and his will does not enter into our hearts. But with children, with people with Down syndrome, God talks directly to their hearts, because this aspect is, it's out of the way. It doesn't play a major role. And so when God speaks to them, they're really God's children. They're incredibly loving. They're not of this world. And the nun also says that they're given this illness, so to speak, this condition, to protect them, because if they didn't have it, they would be mocked in the world. People would be so mean to them, and this condition is like a protection for their super sensitive and pure hearts. And I was just so moved by this nun's words, and I shared this with this woman, and she didn't tell me a word. And I said, let's pray to St. John. I offered to do this. And we did. And that's it. She doesn't call me up. She doesn't tell me anything. I'm thinking about it, also priests, we think about these things. A lot of these things we take home. And sometimes after an evening of confessions, it's not that easy to sleep. I mean, I heard this guy, I don't know if I should tell you. I mean, it's just gross. I mean, something about eating an embryo. I don't know whether this guy's nut, I don't know. But I mean, this image stayed with me that night. It was very disturbing.
Now we're not going to sleep tonight.
No, Shek said curfew's at 11. So you hear some things. I mean, you hear a lot of things, and most things actually, by God's grace, you even forget. And but some things, you can hear 200 confessions, and you'll have one confession. Somebody tells you we're getting divorced, and it kills the priest. It just kills you, if you know the people. Because you have a home church which is going to be destructed. And sometimes they tell you in hindsight, they don't tell you when it's happening or that it might happen. And you find out they've made a decision, and it's just devastating. And especially if you've married them. But anyways, what was I talking? Oh yeah, this woman, she just doesn't call me. I'm thinking about it, and then eventually you forget. And maybe a year and a half later, this lady walks up to me, and they all say the same thing. Father, do you remember me? I can't remember what I did yesterday, but I do remember faces. And I'm looking, and I said, why don't you remind me? She said, remember I came to you, I was pregnant with a child with Down syndrome. And she shows me her girl, and she doesn't have Down syndrome. She's a beautiful little blonde girl, a year and a half, walking, and mother's just beaming, and just a super blessing. And even if she did have it, I think after a year and a half, she would be this would be the most loved kid in the family. So these things happen, all the time. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
St. John have any spiritual successors or spiritual sons?
Well, you can all be his spiritual children, I kind of consider him my father, my teacher, and my friend. I really do. I mean, recently my wife had a very important decision to make, and it was killing her, and she was very distressed at a certain situation. She really didn't know what to do, and I was supportive of her, but she wasn't sure which way to go, and I told her, just let him, just ignore it. You don't have to put up with this. It's just ridiculous. It's just, I don't know about this project, and I said, well, and I had done this recently for the first time in my life. I had done something similar. I said, I'm writing 2 notes. Call this person, let it go. No, call a arbitrary person, a priest. Don't call the person themselves. Call a priest who can be an intermediary and who knows a little bit about the situation. And so I made them the exact same size so she wouldn't see. I said, and she went to church, read an Akatist, closed her eyes, picked a lot, and it said, call him. And as soon as she called him, right away everything was resolved in her heart, because it's God's will. So all of us can be his spiritual successors if we honor our parents, if we live in purity, if we're strict to ourselves, if we love the church. We're all his spiritual successors. It's really not that, some of the people who knew him, just amazing, they didn't see anything. So I think it's important to understand and love St. John's spirit, and then we will be his successors. And there are priests who never met him, and they become priests because reading his life they were so moved, and they read his works and they try to imitate him as much as possible. So in as far as, I don't know who his spiritual father was. Father Modeste, I believe, was for a while. And in San Francisco, he may have confessed to Father Mitrofan. I'm not sure. And maybe Father Spiridon, who you saw at the Red Vestments, Palo Alto. But some of the altar boys who served with him, they're amazingly, not all of them are close to the church. Not all of them even go to communion. I mean, I visited somebody in the hospital, he hadn't communed for ages, and he said, I'm St. John's subdeacon. So it's not, we all have an opportunity to become somebody's spiritual successors, even if we can get to know them through their lives, through footage, through stories, through witnesses, through the liturgy, through his relics. I think Shek is putting pressure on me.
I heard the accommodations are pretty good in terms of.
Yeah, but it's a long time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.